11:42 p.m. in Seattle. It was raining, the kind of heavy, relentless downpour that felt like the sky was trying to wash the city clean. I unlocked my front door, exhausted from a 12-hour shift at the firm, and stepped into the dark, silent hallway of the Victorian house my grandfather Arthur had left me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't check it. I just wanted to sleep. But the screen lit up with a notification from my bank app. The number glared back at me in bold white text. $6,500. Merchant Emirates Airlines, first class one-way. My stomach dropped. Before I could even process the theft, a text message arrived from my sister Victoria. It was a photo of her and her husband Tyler in the Emirates lounge holding champagne flutes. The caption read, "We made it, don't be mad, we decided to treat ourselves, you always said family helps family." Water wave emoji. Airplane emoji. I stared at the phone. They had accessed the joint emergency account I had opened with my mother when I was 18. And forgotten to close. They hadn't asked, they hadn't called, they had just taken. Before I tell you exactly what I did next, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I want to see who is awake with me. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone against the wall. I did not call my mother to beg for an explanation. Rage, I found, is actually very quiet when it reaches a certain temperature. It is a cold, clarifying thing. I walked into the kitchen, the hardwood floor seeping a damp chill through my socks, and opened my laptop. The screen glow was the only light in the room. I logged into the bank portal. The pending charge was there mocking me, $6,500. There was exactly $214 left in that account. I transferred every last cent into my personal secure savings account. Then I clicked the tab for authorized users. I found my mother's name. I found Victoria's name. I hit remove. I hit confirm. I unlinked the account from every overdraft protection service I had. I cut the financial artery. Next, I picked up my phone and dialed a 24-hour locksmith. The man who answered sounded sleepy. I told him I needed every exterior lock on a Victorian heritage home changed. He asked if I had lost my keys. I told him no, I had lost my patience. I booked him for 6:00 a.m. sharp. I wanted the drills to be the first thing the neighbors heard. I stood there in the silence of the kitchen, listening to the rain against the roof. This house was supposed to be my sanctuary. My grandfather Arthur had left it to me 3 years ago, bypassing my parents and my sister entirely. He had told me once while we were pruning the hydrangeas in the backyard that I was the only one in the family who didn't look at him and see a walking wallet. He wanted the house to go to someone who would maintain the foundation, not just sell the copper wiring for quick cash. But I had failed him. 2 years ago, Victoria and her husband Tyler had asked to stay for a few weeks while his tech startup got off the ground. A few weeks turned into 2 years. They paid 0 rent, they ate my food, they filled the hallway with their clutter and the air with their complaints. For a long time I asked myself why I let it happen. Why did I let them treat me like a living servant in my own property? Tonight, staring at that bank balance, I finally understood the psychology of it. It is called the gambler's fallacy. It is the belief that if you keep playing a losing game, eventually your luck has to turn. I had been treating my family like a slot machine. I kept feeding coins into them. I paid the utility bills. I cooked the dinners. I listened to Victoria's endless monologues about her influencer career. I stayed silent when Tyler mocked my job as a landscape architect, calling it glorified gardening. I put all these coins in, convinced that if I just paid enough, the jackpot would finally drop. I thought that eventually the wheels would spin and land on love or respect or even just basic gratitude. But standing in the dark kitchen, I realized the truth. The machine wasn't just cold, it was unplugged, it was never going to pay out. I had spent thousands of dollars and years of my life waiting for a return on investment that did not exist. My kindness had been a luxury they had overdrafted for the last time. The gambling addiction was over. I was cashing out. I closed my laptop with a snap that echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. I walked into the living room and sank onto the couch, but sleep was impossible. Phone vibrated again. I opened Instagram, morbidly curious. Victoria had posted a new story. It was a video from the first-class cabin. She was filming the interior, panning over the leather seats, the gourmet menu, the amenity kits. Then she turned the camera on herself, raising a glass of champagne, finally getting the luxury we deserve. The caption read, "Self-made Maldisbound." Underneath in the comment section, my mother Sarah had already replied, "So proud of you. You work so hard for everything you have. Enjoy every minute." I stared at the screen, feeling a cold, clinical fascination. It wasn't just theft, it was a belief system. My mother wasn't just enabling Victoria, she was celebrating the exploitation. Seeing that comment made something click into place inside my brain like a key turning in a lock. I had always blamed Victoria for being selfish. I had blamed Tyler for being lazy, but looking at my mother's praise, I realized I had been analyzing the situation incorrectly. Victoria wasn't an anomaly, she was a product. She was a building constructed by our parents, Sarah and David. This was the architecture of entitlement. My parents had built Victoria like a faulty skyscraper. They had focused entirely on the ornate facade, her looks, her charm, her ability to project an image of success while neglecting to pour a foundation of character or responsibility. They had taught her from childhood that she was special, that rules were for other people, and that resources were communal. When I got my first job at 16, my father, David, told me that part of my paycheck should go to Victoria's dance lessons because family supports family. When I bought my first car, my mother insisted I let Victoria drive it whenever she wanted because sharing is caring. They had wired her to believe that my bank account was simply an extension of the family treasury, a fund she had a birthright to access. This realization changed everything. It meant that reasoning with them was impossible. You cannot explain theft to someone who believes they already own what they took. You cannot demand an apology from someone who believes they are the victim of your stinginess. Victoria didn't think she stole $6,500. She thought she had finally withdrawn what the universe owed her, and my parents were the tellers validating the transaction. The anger that had been simmering in my chest cooled into something solid and heavy like lead. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was an infestation. And you don't negotiate with an infestation. You exterminate it. I set my phone down on the coffee table. The time for discussion was over. The time for demolition had begun. I stood up. The pity party was over. The physical purge began at midnight. I went to the utility closet and grabbed a roll of heavy-duty industrial trash bags, the thick black ones meant for construction debris. I started in the living room. Every item that wasn't mine, every throw pillow Victoria had bought with my money, every gadget Tyler had left plugged in went into a bag. I didn't organize. I didn't fold. I didn't care if things broke. I was simply erasing their footprint from my home. The sound of plastic rustling filled the silent house, a rhythmic, satisfying noise that replaced the anxiety in my chest. Then I went upstairs to the master suite. This was the room Grandpa Arthur had designed for himself with the bay window overlooking the sound. Victoria and Tyler had claimed it the day they moved in, relegating me to the smaller guest room down the hall because they needed the space for their creative process. Walking into it now felt like entering a crime scene. The air smelled of their expensive perfume and stale ambition. Their clothes were everywhere, draped over chairs piled on the floor. I started sweeping them into bags with my arm hanger and all. I opened the nightstand drawer on Tyler's side, looking for any stray chargers or electronics I needed to toss. Tucked in the back beneath a stack of old tech magazines, I found a small velvet pouch. I opened it. Inside was my grandfather's vintage Omega watch, the one he had worn every day until he died. The one I had searched for frantically after the funeral, convinced I had lost it. Tyler had stolen it. He had been keeping it in his nightstand like a trophy. I felt a flash of heat go up my neck, but I didn't stop. I put the watch in my pocket and dumped the rest of the drawer into the trash bag. By 4:00 a.m. the hallway was lined with 20 black bags. The house looked different. It looked bigger. It looked like mine again. I made a pot of coffee and sat on the stairs, waiting for the sun. At 5:55. Headlights swept across the front window. The locksmith pulled into the driveway. He was a burly man with a tool belt that jingled as he walked. He didn't ask questions, he just got to work. The sound of the drill biting into the old metal locks was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of boundaries being enforced. It was the sound of freedom. The locksmith was working on the back door, the drill whining against the stubborn old wood when he paused. "Ma'am," he called out. "You might want to come here." I think I hear something downstairs. My heart skipped a beat. The basement was a separate unit accessible only from the garden. Grandpa Arthur had built it as a mother-in-law suite, but I used it for storage. Old furniture, holiday decorations, boxes of my childhood books. I hadn't been down there in months. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer and followed the locksmith outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. We walked around to the side of the house. The basement door, which should have been locked and dusty, was slightly ajar. A soft light spilled out onto the wet grass. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, not dust and mildew, but coffee and lavender. I stepped inside, the flashlight beam cutting through the dimness. My storage boxes were gone. In their place was a fully furnished apartment, a rug I didn't recognize, a small dining table, and sitting at that table frozen in midriff were two strangers, a young couple, maybe early 20s, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The man stood up, hands raised. "Who are you?" He countered. "We rented this place, we have a booking." He pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was the Airbnb app. I leaned in, squinting at the glowing display. There it was. My basement listed as Charming Garden Suite. Private entry, the host Victoria, superhost status. 57 reviews. She said she was the owner. The woman whispered, clutching her coffee mug. She gave us the code. I scrolled through the listing. Available for 6 months, fully booked, average rate $95 a night. Do the math. That was over $2,500 a month. Victoria and Tyler had been running an illegal hotel in my house for half a year. They had been pocketing nearly $15,000 while claiming they were too broke to buy their own groceries, while eating my food, while watching me work double shifts to pay the bills. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was fraud. It was a criminal enterprise operating beneath my floorboards. Any lingering flicker of guilt I might have felt about the eviction, any tiny voice whispering that maybe I was being too harsh on family, was extinguished instantly. It was replaced by a cold, white-hot fury. They hadn't just stolen my money for a vacation. They had been monetizing my property behind my back. They had turned my sanctuary into a profit center for their lifestyle. I looked at the young couple. They weren't intruders. They were victims of the same scam. "I am the owner," I said, my voice steady. "And you have been renting from a con artist." I spent the next 2 hours in a state of hyper-focused efficiency. First, I apologized to the young couple. I explained the situation, showed them the deed to the house, and helped them find a nearby hotel. They were shaken but understanding, especially when I offered to cover their first night's stay. Once they were gone, the real work began. I called the non-emergency police line. An officer arrived within 20 minutes. I filed a report for fraud and illegal subletting. I gave him the Airbnb listing, the booking receipts the couple had forwarded to me, and the bank statement showing the unauthorized Emirates charge. "This is extensive," the officer noted, flipping through my stack of evidence. "You're sure you want to press charges against family?" "I am pressing charges against the individuals who defrauded me," I corrected. "Their relation to me is irrelevant." Next, I called my friend Jessica, a real estate attorney. She walked me through the eviction process. Because they were family and had established residency, I technically had to give notice, but because they had committed a crime on the property running an illegal business, I could file for an immediate notice to quit based on lease violation and illegal activity. We drafted the documents together over video call: a notice of trespass, a formal eviction notice, a cease and desist for the Airbnb listing. I printed them out on heavy official bond paper. I walked through the house with my phone documenting everything. The scratches on the hardwood floors from their constant rearranging of furniture, the water stain on the ceiling they had never mentioned, the missing tools from the garage. Every photo was a time-stamped piece of ammunition. I wasn't just a sister anymore, I wasn't even a daughter. I was an aggrieved landlord building a case against delinquent tenants, the emotional tether that had bound me to them for 25 years. The guilt, the obligation, the hope had snapped. In its place was a steel cable of resolve. I went to the front door and taped the legal notices to the wood at eye level. I put a second set in a waterproof plastic envelope and duct taped it to the door frame. I wanted them to see it before they even tried their keys. I wanted the legal reality to hit them before the rain did. 10 days later, the rain returned to Seattle with a vengeance. I was sitting in the living room, a cup of tea in my hand, when a yellow taxi pulled into the driveway. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched them emerge. Victoria looking tanned and golden in a white linen dress that was already soaking up the Seattle drizzle. Tyler struggling with 3 massive suitcases, and my parents, Sarah and David, climbing out of the back seat laughing about something. They had joined the trip halfway through, using their own savings to crash the family vacation I had funded. They looked happy. They looked oblivious. They walked up the path, Victoria leading the way. She reached into her purse, pulled out her key and slid it into the lock. I saw her frown. She jiggled it. She tried again, then she looked at the door frame and saw the waterproof envelope. She ripped it open. I stood up and walked to the door. I could hear her reading the legal jargon aloud, her voice rising in confusion and then panic. Eviction fraud. Tyler dropped the suitcases. My mother started pounding on the wood. "Olivia, open this door right now." I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just as far as the safety chain would allow. The 4 of them stood on the porch, drenched and furious. "What is this?" Victoria shrieked, waving the papers. "You changed the locks. Are you insane? How could you do this to your family?" My mother cried, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "We just got back. We have nowhere to go." Tyler stepped forward, aggressive. Open the door, Olivia, this is illegal, I live here. I looked at them, really looked at them. For years I had rehearsed speeches in my head. I had imagined screaming at them, listing every grievance, demanding they acknowledge my pain. But now, standing inches away, realized that words were useless. Words were currency they didn't accept. Arguments were just invitations for them to gaslight me. If I spoke, I was giving them something to twist. So I chose the only weapon they couldn't manipulate: silence. I didn't say a word. I simply looked at Tyler and pointed to the police report number highlighted on the paper in Victoria's hand. I looked at my parents, whose faces were crumbling from indignation into genuine fear. I looked at my sister, whose tan was already fading into a pale shock. Then, with deliberate slowness, I closed the door. I heard Victoria scream my name. I heard my father shouting threats. I heard the heavy thud of a suitcase being kicked, but I didn't stop. I locked the deadbolt. I slid the chain back into place. I turned off the porch light. I watched through the living room curtains as they dragged their wet suitcases back to the waiting taxi. Victoria was sobbing. My father was on his phone, likely calling a lawyer who would tell him he had no case. They drove away, leaving nothing but tire tracks in the mud. I didn't feel sad. I felt like I had just set down a heavy backpack I had been carrying since I was a child. The next day I changed my phone number. 3 months have passed since that night. The house is quiet now. The basement has been reclaimed. I turned it into my home office, painted a deep, calming sage green. There are no strangers living under my floorboards. There are no moochers in my master suite. I took Tyler to small claims court for the Emirates charge and the Ayab profits. The judge didn't just rule in my favor, she garnished his wages. Every 2 weeks a check for $300 arrives in my mailbox. It is the only contact I have with them, and it is entirely automated. I am sitting on my porch this morning drinking coffee that I paid for in a house that is finally truly mine. The silence isn't empty, it's full of peace. If you have ever had to cut off a family member to save your own sanity, share this story. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel if you want more story like this. Thanks for watching. God bless you.